Hi, I'm Thomas Broadhead. I'm the editor of the Critical Performance edition of the Ives Fourth Symphony. And in this video, I'm going to talk about my experience with the San Francisco Symphony, who performed the work in the new edition under its music director, Michael Tilson Thomas, in November of 2017. And this was the capstone to my real-world feedback project. Tilson Thomas is rightfully acknowledged as a fantastic interpreter of the Ives Fourth. He's a long history with it, so I knew that feedback from him was going to be great. But it was also good that he was getting the materials in their more or less final state, fully informed by what I experienced with various orchestras. Now, one of the things that came up was something that was quite a surprise. So let me turn to it. Here's the passage in the comedy movement in which players are divided into groups that are being conducted in 5 and then also in 2. And the in 2 group is really just a subset of instruments. It's not very many altogether. It's just the flutes, orchestra piano, celesta, bells, gongs, solo piano, and then first violins. The rest of the orchestra is in 5, and 2 different tunes are being presented. One is In the Sweet By and By, and its introductory phrase, being played by the clarinets, the trumpet, the trombone, and the second violin. And it just goes dum bum 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 bum, and it just goes on from there like that. And this is actually the tune that stands out the most in this passage. And so I thought it's worthwhile to mention this because I want to focus actually on what's going on in the other tune in the N5 group, which is Nettleton, which is being intoned by the saxophone, bassoons, and the low strings, the violas and cellos. And it goes bum 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 bum, but Ives subtracts the beat from it, so it becomes bum 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 bum. He repeats it 3 times. The group in 2 is just sort of supporting it with a treatment of There Is a Happy Land in the flutes, being played very delicately. And when I was examining this passage and figuring out how to present it, I thought, well, let's separate these into 2 groups, and that way they can be rehearsed independently and brought together, and then, flag them specially in the score and the parts, so that can be done. One of my colleagues, who I respect and who has expertise in what various conductors do, said, oh, well, Michael Tilson Thomas will definitely conduct this passage in 2. He's not going to conduct it in 5. He's not going to use an assistant conductor. He's just going to do the whole thing in 2. So these parts that have been set in 5 down here really need to be rebeamed with tied 16th notes across the middle of the measures and things like that. And I thought, well, gee, that's going to make reading that music rather difficult. And what players had said to me again and again was that kind of notation is just hard to negotiate. So I thought, well, let me try to accommodate Tilson Thomas and other conductors who might be like he is about this passage. So let me present it both ways. Let me present the in 5 material both in 5 and also in 2. So I'll have 2 staves, one on top of the other, stacked, with the 2 presentations of the notation. And then to indicate that that had been done, I put a note at the bottom of the page, a footnote that explains in the parts, measures 115 through 120 are provided as here in 5 and in 2 to facilitate conducting in either 5 or 2 with or without an assistant conductor. So here's a representative part from the 5 group, and it's the part for saxophone, in this case, B-flat tenor. And it may look like there are 2 saxophones playing simultaneously here, but no, it's the 2 notational treatments of the passage. First, if the passage is to be conducted in 5, you read from the top staff, and then if the passage is to be conducted in 2, you read from the bottom staff. And the material is a treatment of the hymn Nettleton, and it goes like this. Dum bum 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 bum. Well, what is that? It's an 11/8 note beat cell that's repeated 3 times. So here's the first period from here to 10, 11 beats, and that starts again. You count ahead 11, and then it starts a 3rd time. So if it's conducted in 5, it sounds like this. bum 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 bum. All right, that's fairly easy to execute. Now, if conducted in 2, it's far more tricky to execute. It's something like this: bum 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 bum. And that's hard for me to do. It's tricky, I think, for anyone. And it risks the kind of mechanical performance that was, a complaint that the one conductor had about the notation of the 2 oboes, 2 clarinets, and high bell in that passage in the finale. Now, if you've been following these videos, you may think, well, were you not advocating for this kind of notation for that, at least originally, before the conductor made a noise about it? I'm like, well, yeah, but that's a different case. That's where, in the midst of the orchestra, there's just a small number of players who then have to have a clear line of sight to an assistant conductor who is conducting the BU and is keeping the BU in lockstep with the OU, following the temporal plan that Ives has laid out in the score. For all those stars to align would be incredible. So it's unfortunately the case that those players will more than likely have to read a kind of analytical renotation, similar to the one here that's provided in 2. So that's a different case. And in this case, I'd say it's far easier to read this in 5, and that's why I think it's a better choice for the principal conductor to be conducting this passage like this. But in deference to those who might want to do it as had been suggested in 2, well, then here's this notation. There's another issue, though, to this. It eats up a lot of the real estate on the page. Here's a cello part that shows this. There's a lot of white space that could have been used to spread things out to make the music easier and to allow players space for writing in their markings, has been consumed by the presentation of this material 2 ways. So that's another consideration for this passage. Before I got to San Francisco, this passage was always executed with 2 conductors, one controlling the N2 group, beating a pattern in 2, and the other controlling the N5 group, beating a pattern in 5. And the 2 groups were always rehearsed independently and then brought together to really good effect. But I just kept waiting for a conductor to do it without an assistant conductor and to conduct everyone in a unified 2 pattern, making use of that N2 notation that I had built into all those parts that are properly in 5. And so when I finally got to San Francisco and Davies Hall, I thought, okay, here's where all that work I did is going to prove its mettle, right? When I got to San Francisco, I met with Michael Tilson Thomas in his office, and we went over the piece. And when he came to this passage, he stopped and he said, oh, the way to conduct this passage is in 1. And that's how he rehearsed it, and that's how he conducted it during the performance. All that work I had done and all that maintenance that I had applied to that passage so that it could be conducted in 2 went out the window because it wasn't the case that he was conducting it in 2 at all. He conducted it in 1. So there was no need to have an alternate notation in 2 for the players who were in 5, as it turned out. So that notation was stripped out of the parts, creating additional real estate on the page for them to be able to write in their markings and so on. And the footnote that pointed this out, that there was, this other notation on the parts, was also eliminated. And I can feel good that if it's presented in 5 and 2, as I had originally designed it to, that it can be done that way, which it was done 11 times when I was present, or it could be done in 1, as MTT did it. And he did it quite well. It sounds just great. There's one other story to share from my week with the San Francisco Symphony. The solo pianist was this young lion named Peter Dugan. And he played the part with incredible physicality and with great musicality. And I approached him after the first rehearsal and I said, hey, have you done this piece before? He said, no, it's my first experience with it. And I love it and all that. I said, okay, well, what's your background? What's your rep? What do you do? And I was expecting, Rachmaninoff and Scriabin, things like that. And instead, he began listing, composers and music that was all over the repertoire. And then he said, and jazz. And I realized that's it. That's the special sauce. He's bringing to this part experience with jazz, and it's informing him in a way that Ives, I think, would really have appreciated. And the other solo pianists I had heard were all great, each in their own way. And Dugan was great in a very special way. So it was just interesting that there was a pianist who had this background in jazz and classical music. If you look him up, you'll find that he's doing lots of wide-ranging classical music with lots of performers. That kind of broad experience can inform a really great and engaging performance.